So guys, let's give it a couple more minutes and then we can get started. I'll write it on the chat. And we're starting in a couple of minutes, more or less. Okay, let's give it one more minute. All right, I think we can get started. So hello everyone. This is the second to last webinar that we are giving on content related, to startup finance and startups in general. This you may have missed like the previous, or if you have missed the previous webinars of this series of a total of 8, you can check them in YouTube, or you can check them also in the landing page where you probably got the invite for this one. You can check all of them. We have already covered topics of like business planning, reporting, how to prepare a business deck for a funding round, like funding opportunities, etc. So yeah, this one today is not so financial, not so technical, not so numerical actually. And but yeah, I hope that therefore you guys can relate more, or like it's, I guess, for a bigger audience. But also this, don't think that it's less important. It's actually maybe the most important, because it touches topics of like a culture in the company and mindset, and like how the CEOs can affect the culture in a company and stuff like that, that are actually crucial. So I think this should be pretty interesting. Yeah, like always, I'll do like a brief introduction of myself and of the company, of the Startup CFO. Then, obviously, if we are going to talk about lean startup, then let's define lean and let's define startup. So let's define like what is the overarching principle behind the concept of lean and lean startup, and what type of companies are we referring to? Like what do we define as a startup for the next of the presentation? And then obviously the core is the lean startup method. The lean startup method as described in the book from Eric Rice. And it has essentially 3 different parts, each of them divided in, if I'm not wrong, in a further 4 subdivisions. But the main ones are the vision of the startup, the steering, and the acceleration. So as always, feel free to ask questions. Feel free to participate at any time, write on the chat, or like even unmute your microphones, and I'd be happy to answer live. Actually, I think that it may be more interesting if we make it more of a dialogue in that sense. Then let's move on. Well, I always try to leave some room at the end for questions or stories or stuff like that. Usually I'm pretty bad at it, and we get there like with not so much time. But if needed, obviously, and if there are questions or whatever, we wouldn't mind to go like some minutes beyond. So, yes, who am I? I'm Jaime. Well, if you have been in the other webinars, you're going to be bored, but I promise I'll do it in 2 minutes. I studied physics between Madrid and Boston really long ago. I actually started a PhD in New York But then I quit science and I started working in consulting, in management consulting, in McKinsey in Madrid. I worked there for almost 2 years. And then I had the opportunity to switch to the startup world already in the finance area. So in two startups from Madrid. One of them was On Track, that is kind of like Uber for freight transport. And I'm telling it this way because later on we will see how that's a bad description for a company. And JobLink, which was a location intelligence SaaS. And then I was an employee at those companies. Then at some point I started having projects as freelance of many of my former colleagues that wanted like some support and told me like, please help me with the business plan. Please help me for the alternative funding, stuff like that. So I started like helping startups. At some point I started helping too many, so I couldn't keep like my normal job. So I was completely like a freelancer. And then at some point I had too many clients, so I decided to try to scale it in a company, which is the Startup CFO. And what do we do at the Startup CFO? Our main business line is fractional CFO services for early stage startups. So very often a startup that is less than, I don't know, even like 60 employees, or that hasn't received like funding above 15 million euros or something like that, they need obviously some senior support in the finance department, but they don't need a full-time CFO that is experienced because there's not so much work in that department. So in our clients, what we do is the business plan reporting and forecasting. We help them with fundraising, we help them with administrative topics, and essentially like to keep the finance department running. Doing that, we have worked, I think, over 80 early stage startups, but including other business lines that consulting, bookkeeping, even legal, public funding, and stuff like that. We have worked with almost 200 startups already. We are a team of 25, and we are between Madrid and Berlin. We actually recently opened our office in Berlin, and we are already active in the Berlin area. In fact, by the way, I'll be going to Berlin next week. That is the TOA event, and also I'm speaking in another event on how to fundraise during this economic downturn, organized by Insert. So yeah, happy to meet anyone in Berlin next week. So in our YouTube channel, if you look us up in YouTube, you will find a lot of content like this in both in Spanish and English. And then also all the content from this webinar series that, by the way, we have only one webinar more left, which will be next week. Actually, I will keep that one from Berlin. So this is on us. And why do we need this webinar? A webinar specifically on the lean startup. And why did I think it was very relevant, even if this webinar series is more on like finance itself? Because there are more and more traditional entrepreneurs entering the startup world. And as we have seen in the previous webinars, the startup world has a very particular vocabulary. So in my opinion, it's not too complex, but it's simply like a different vocabulary. But also they have a very different culture, essentially. We will see with the definition of startup that there are businesses with huge uncertainty and with huge ambition, usually. So this creates many dynamics that a traditional entrepreneur may not face like very well. Many entrepreneurs or many businessmen are working in sectors that already existed. And imagine you open a marketing agency tomorrow and there were already many marketing agencies, which doesn't mean that yours cannot be successful, of course. But if you start something from scratch and like a new product or a new service, then it's like very different dynamics. So part of the problems that we are going to describe is the same in every single company. Of course, like you can apply to other companies. Part of it, a big part of it, yes. But the startups that we were saying are like very, very, very unique. And like, as we will see, like there are like very specific characteristics that you that show you that you need like a new operating model to run them. And making a mistake in this strategic approach can also be fatal, or will also be fatal, almost certainly, especially at early stages. It's not only the financial approach that like you can be, obviously, if you screw up there, then you have a problem, and that's why I think we add value to our clients. But it's also on the strategy, and like if you do the finances, the finance part amazingly, but you don't pivot when you need to pivot, and you keep persevering in something that you shouldn't, then the finance guy, there's nothing that he or she could do. So let's get to the chase already. What are the definitions of lean and startup to talk about the lean startup? So lean, you may have heard it in a totally different scenario. Lean, actually, it's a concept that started, if I'm not wrong, in manufacturing. And actually, for example, Toyota is probably like the company that was maybe the ambassador of the lean philosophy to the rest of the world. So it's a tricky concept in my opinion, but like once you get the mindset of like, okay, like once you understand like the current of thought that it implies, then it's very, very powerful and very useful for any company. So lean, like the definition I found specific, is a systematic approach of eliminating waste, so every step adds value for the customer. And okay, we all agree with this, and it's like, it sounds great. Further definitions. What do we mean with waste? And what do we mean with value? Let's start with the optimistic one. Value is a capacity provided to a customer at the right time, at the right price, as defined by the customer. So the customer wants something, wants it for a particular amount of money, and wants it now. And the client knows what it wants, because we will see that actually a very common problem is that many entrepreneurs are too in love with their product, and they start building a product that is the right one for them, but not so much for the customer. And waste is an activity that consumes resources from the company and does not add value. Resources can be time, can be money, or can be focus. Actually, there's a good story of like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. Like the story is longer, but that they agreed on the most important factor for success is focus. So if you if you consume focus on something that does not add value to the customer as defined by the customer, and at the right price at the right time, then it's not working fine. And then there are different principles that relate to this, or principles that make sense, or like ways to like land this definition that we saw before. First of all, as we were saying, to define the value from the customer's perspective. Always the customer perspective. I insist. I'm like, beware of founders that are in love with their product. The best founders are like, they think their product like, oh my God, this is still wrong. I can't believe we didn't fix this. It's full of bugs. That's the great entrepreneur. The one that says my product is amazing and should be worth 100 billion, not so much. Identify the value chain, like how are we creating value and what steps in the process are not creating value as defined by the customer, which is the most important thing. Create processes in which you create value, in which at the very end there's something for the customer, a capacity for the customer that we can do. Then the concept of pull, like listen to the market and not so much push to the market. Of course, by the way, many of these things we can find maybe like more exceptions than rules or stuff like that. But in general, the concept is listen to the market and make it yourself and build it. Not so much on like training the market. It's also like a sign of a bad entrepreneur that says like, no, I'm going to teach the market, or the market doesn't understand us. It's like, maybe you don't understand the market, and that makes more sense. And another principle, which I love, is continuous improvement. And this means that whatever you're doing in the company and whatever step, it's probably something that you can improve. Then you need to define the focus, because of course you need to add value to the customer, but there are like, there are ways that are more profitable in terms of resources that you need to consume. But the mindset of that everything that we are doing, we can improve. The opposite of that, I guess it's not so common in startups, but the opposite of that is to say like, we have always done it this way. By the way, well, even in startups, we have always done it this way. But I think it's a more open culture in this sense to say like, but we are going to start doing it different by definition. By the way, I just gave like 2 minutes on lean. There are books this thick about the lean startup, lean manufacturing, lean philosophy, lean management. We actually have one of lean accounting in the office. So believe me that this is a topic that could go on forever. But at least I hope that we got something and that will help us understand the lean startup method. And what is the definition of startup? Again, we could talk hours about this. And this is certainly more on my field. The definition that the book provides, that the lean startup provides, is a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And there are several things here that are important. The institution is designed to create a new product or service. It's not that a huge company decided to build a new product or service, but the company itself is designed to create a new product or service. Then, by the way, the most common is product here, especially because we will relate it to many more concepts that are usually related to startups, or that like people would mix them as well in the same definition. Usually product, and that is a new thing under conditions of extreme uncertainty. You are like absolutely aware of the fact that this can fail. It's a new product and you don't know how it's going. So the definition of new is also not that easy, because many times also beware of entrepreneurs that say like there's nothing at all like this in the market. We have no competition. There's nothing at all that is even similar in the market. I'm always like, let's see if you are the smartest guy that only you came up with this. Of course, it's great to say like, you know, I'm going to add this capability to this function that didn't exist. Now that this technology exists, I can apply it to this and create a new product that uses it, and that's fine. But yeah, every time I hear like the new, there's nothing like it or whatever, I'm a little skeptical. I mean, it will be a startup itself, but I'm skeptical of the potential success. Okay, we have a question from Jaime. Actually, Jaime, like me, but with a Y. What consideration about startups when differentiating from traditional companies to have a technological platform, maybe allowing an exponential increase? Good point. Yes, it is. This is a great point, actually. So many times you would consider a startup to be like the typical tech startup. And I would say that 90% of the times, that is actually true. But, and also, by the way, another concept that is related is what do VCs invest on? And usually all these three are very related. So in my opinion, the technology is usually a factor, one of the most important factors that drive that. Once the new technology exists, then we can build a product that we couldn't do it before. You know, like, for example, I'll give a couple of stupid examples. I mean, my own business, like without internet, it would be much, much more difficult, especially to try to make it scalable and international. Or Capchase, for example. Capchase is a company I love. We'll talk about it next week, by the way, more about it. Capchase lends money to SaaS companies, which is like, you know, there's not like so much uncertainty, or there's not so much, you know, the business of lending money is probably the second oldest business in the world. So why is it a startup? Because they, with the technology of like, they are able to integrate with the accounts and like the billing system and the accounting and the banks of the SaaS companies. And the SaaS model itself is a new model that didn't exist 20 years ago, such that they can analyze those companies and give them money in a matter of 2 days, for example. So usually a technology enables the new product. And of course, internet, well, internet is like the most universal by now, but transistor back in the day. But yeah, without internet, you cannot do Facebook. So many times they do have a technological basis, because that's how the new product can be built. But still, there's a lot of uncertainty. But yeah, I really like this question on, and the definition, obviously, actually, we will, this is like the second point, is like an official definition. There are many related concepts, and obviously there's not like black or white in defining what's a startup. In fact, I'll just give you my definition, at least like when I try to analyze clients. For us at least, and don't pay too much attention here, but for us at least, I consider a startup the one that depends on venture capital funding and wants to keep depending on venture capital funding, like to accelerate the growth more and more. I think we talked about this in the very first webinar. So the common factor of all startups is uncertainty. And we will see that everything that we will do in the lean startup method well, everything at the beginning, especially, is to remove uncertainty. You want to translate uncertainty to certainty. You have no idea if the market will buy your product. You have no idea how the customers will react, how much changes you will need to make. And it is virtually impossible that you got everything right before starting. So at the beginning, there's a lot of uncertainty, and your only goal is to remove uncertainty. Financial success will come up. But still, again, a startup is just a company in the end, with uncertainty, but just a company. So what is the objective? To give money to the shareholder. So many things are special in startups, and of course, many things aren't. Or we shouldn't get too crazy, or we shouldn't lose sight that it's a normal company. So, and by the way, following what we were saying and related with the technology, which is actually in the second point of the scalable models, there are certain business models that are for startups and many others that are not. What are the typical business models for startups? That they require a lot of initial capital investment. You need to build your product before commercialization, or at least part of it. That the model is scalable, that ideally, and this is related with the question before, you can sell like 1, 1,000, or 1,000,000 licenses of your product and have more or less the same expenses, don't grow proportionally. That they have appetite for recurring investment. This is more or less what I was saying before, of like their appetite to grow with external capital, and a huge market size compared to the money that you need to create it, virtually unlimited. So they will have a lot of money. They will receive, if they are successful, like funding rounds in their probably 4 to 8 years. Revenue growth is very fast, usually unthinkable if you didn't have like external funding. And the growth depends on that, based on profitable unit economics that we covered it in the first one. So the lean startup. The lean startup, I would say, is the most accepted framework to create a good startup. The main Bible from this is it was written by Eric Rice, I think around maybe 15 years ago. And I consider it like the Bible for startups. I would definitely, like, every time that someone recommends me, asks me about recommendations of what to read, I tell them to read the Lean Startup, even like before any finance or whatever. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I think it's available online for free, if I'm not wrong, actually. So, and although it's pretty long, well, as like the normal size of a book. So, let's define 12 stages and in 3 main groups: vision, steer, and accelerate. Then, I mean, many times this is related as well with the funding rounds that a startup get. Many times this is seed, this is Series A, and this is Series B. I think we discussed it in another webinar that what we call seed, what we call Series A, or what we call Series B, it's a completely it's not an official thing. You cannot consider like officially this a startup. You take a look at it, and this funding is like Series A funding. But the intention of the funding, and usually the amount and the funds that invest. So, for example, at the beginning, people invest like, let's see if there's something here. Now it's like there's some product market fit, and then it's like things are going well. So then let's try to accelerate and scale as much as possible. So many times like seed, Series A, Series B, but even that can be like a bit tricky. So let's start with the first stage of the first which is start. You need to advance in conditions of extreme uncertainty. So you will need a ton of you will face a ton of trade-offs in every decision. Short-term success does not imply long-term success. So if you're working in extreme uncertainty, you need to learn and remove uncertainty. So for the short term and the long term, your only goal is going to be to learn and to remove uncertainty, to know more about the business, about the market, about everything. If you think about it, many startups like follow the concept of the scientific method. It's exactly the same what we're going to do. They observe something that is happening in the market. The hypothesis is that, I think we can, if you did this, then the market will like it. And experiment, measure, and then to interpret the data. So this is like this needs to work like a feedback loop, like a car that like every time that the piston, that the wheel turns, like it creates another loop by itself. Fine, not a rocket that is just like you put money, it goes very fast, but then they run out of gas and they fall. So it's essentially the scientific method. Your only goal is to learn. And what would be the alternative? The alternative is to build something on yourself that you love, but apparently the market does not. So, for example, I always say that in on track, again, the Uber for freight transport, if it had been my idea, probably I would have started like programming for like 5 years until I have a perfect program. Then I go to the street, I try to sell it, and apparently I didn't know that the trucks have like a time limit that they cannot pass driving every day. I wouldn't know that some of them need like a platform for like, you know, taking in the goods or taking them out. So I would find like, shit, I've been building something for 5 years and it doesn't work. So you need to create an MVP, a minimum viable product, but in a scenario as real as possible. We will see later that this doesn't necessarily mean to sell, but at least to be the closest, as close as possible for the actual file. Again, beware of the founders that are in love with their own product, that they are building something for themselves, but they say that the market is wrong if they don't. So then the second step, well, by the way, each of these in the book, they have like a whole chapter. I really recommend you to read. So let's part on define. The only way to create long-term sustainability is to create an innovation factory that you can, such that you can adapt to changes in the market. There hasn't been a single successful startup, I think, that they didn't pivot at some point. We will see that in more detail later. But my point is like rapid adaptation to changes. You had a hypothesis at the beginning, and that hypothesis is not right to 100%. So, so then the market will keep changing, by the way. Probably if you're like tackling a big market and your technology can provide a lot of value, probably like similar things are going on. And also that you will listen to feedback from your clients, and then you need to adapt rapidly. And there's this part that sounds more like intangible and more unimportant then, but it's actually crucial, which is culture. The culture of the company, especially of the CEO, should be to create an innovation factor, but not innovation for like the product or the one product they're building. Innovation daily, innovation to change what they're building. So the leaders and the middle managers can't be the bottleneck for all this experimentation. You need to give your teams autonomy to build stuff and autonomy to make mistakes, usually. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck with the vision of only one person, and usually that is pushing that vision too much. So this is actually really dangerous if not done right. Again, the culture usually comes from the CEO or the founders of the company. It is very difficult to change that. And if the CEO is a person that like doesn't listen and is not flexible, he's not going to create a flexible company. So, and if the CEO needs to have a vision, needs to lead, but needs to be absolutely open, because again, not a single successful startup got it right the first time. It's impossible that their vision matches perfectly what the market needs. Again, feel free to stop me. So here we see the learn part. In this I put here 3 concepts that I consider pretty important. The first one is validated learn. So that demonstrates that capacity that you are providing to the client, that value, the usefulness that you need for the sustainability of the business. So and this is like very easy to get it wrong. If you put a ton of money in marketing, you're going to have new users. I think that applies to almost every product, but for the terrible ones, I guess. So this needs to be validated learning. You need to focus on KPIs that matter. Fake and vanity metrics like new users, if you put a lot of money in marketing, is not something that is telling you, am I doing it right? Not at all. Retention does. The speed in which you get new leads after release. That's if you didn't, for example, invest much in marketing, or like how much your current clients recommend you, like the NPS. That is validated learning. And that is like listening to the market with a lot of feedback. And again, focusing on whether we're building a product that is correct or not, that is right, and that covers a need for the market. The numbers would come later. So will come later and will be great if you're learning about the market. But again, validated learning. So then we have like the waste versus value. Obviously, value, anything that helps the customer. So everything that we do needs to, and we will talk about this later, needs to affect some key metric, some KPI of this startup. So many times people start defining like, let's do this out of intuition, and then they say let's do this and realize that in the end it's like, so how do we track if this helped or not? What is the KPI that we wanted to track? And people will tell, no, now our clients are happier. Bullshit. That comes from intuition, and that comes probably from the last two examples of feedback that you get from the clients, but not necessarily something that is true if you look at the numbers. So to track if something is a waste or value, you are consuming resources. Let's see if there's value. Let's see if they are affecting any important KPI of the company. And then there's a temptation here that is very tricky, and I've heard this from many people actually. This is the audacity of zero. This can go two ways. One of them is that many companies don't want to have revenue in their first stages because they don't want to have little revenue, or they are afraid of having little revenue, like a very small revenue in their very first stages. So they say like, no, don't worry, we're not going to sell by now, we're just building our product. Because if you're still in zero deliberately, you can still claim that there's a big break and that you could get to infinite. If there's like €1 revenue after 5 months selling, I made it too extreme, but like €100 revenue, like after 6 months selling with 2 salesmen, is like, there may be something wrong. But if there is something wrong, you should know as soon as possible. And then in month 3 of that dynamic, then you would have switched and you would have built. So, and the second part of the audacity of zero is similar, which is not to share data with workers, investors, directors, or whatever, because you don't want them to lose faith. This is way more human. By the way, all this is like way more human than technical, in my opinion. So many times people would don't want to say like how it's going, because the other people are thinking like, wow, I'm sure like they're doing it. Every time they tell me they're doing amazing, they're imagining 1 million revenue, and in reality it's 100,000. But everything I just said delays learning. Again, not so much on like short-term money, not so much on the next funding round, not so much on having the directors on board. It's learning what we want to do. And if we are building something that is wrong, sooner or later, probably sooner, we will see. And then we have the concept of experiment. And here it's this is something pretty important, and there's actually a very important concept here, which is product market fit. I was talking before about the lean startup method compared to the scientific method. So the hypothesis is the vision of the company. I think if we do this, then we will be super successful, and the market will buy it, and our customers will be happy. And then the experiment that we are doing, well, the objective of that experiment is to understand if there's a business opportunity there. So the experiment can be any experiment, by the way, because the experiment is the startup and also everything we try to do in between. Any experiment that we do, any new functionality that we add, any new feature, any new even change in design, it searches one or the other type of hypothesis, or either a value hypothesis or a growth hypothesis. The value hypothesis is the objective is to test whether a product or service adds value to the customer. It's something that they couldn't cover in any other way in the market. The growth hypothesis tests how the new customers are gonna reach you, are gonna reach your new product or service. So, this can be, for example, add a new functionality or change something on, pricing would be like the growth hypothesis. Like, okay, if you lower it, then you will see more clients coming, or obviously any new marketing initiative or stuff. So the experiment should answer these 4 questions. Do customers have the problem you want to solve? And this obviously is crucial. Many times, by the way, the CEO thinks that they have it, and only the CEO has that problem. So if there is a solution, if there was a solution of that problem, would your clients buy it? Let's test it with the experiment. If they bought it, would they choose our product? Why are we better than the competition? I think we talked about this in the very second or third webinar on how to do a pitch deck, that you need to show that your market is huge, that your team is the best, and that your product is 10 times better than the competition. So is it us? Like, are we doing something different? And more important, can we build the solution? And here's where the solution comes. You need to look for product market fit. Maybe there is that market that is, that needs a solution, whatever, like, fine. But do we know how to build the solution? Like, or is our solution the best? Do they like it? Many times, and we will see many examples later. We'll see that, there's a market, but we're not doing it right. So let's see at the beginning with a small testing how to do it right. Product market fit is another concept that I guess we could argue forever. But yeah, the most important thing here is, I prefer the subjective way to define it is like, you're doing something that there's a market that is having that problem and that you know how to solve it, your solution solves it. The more numerical answer to me comes from, especially from retention. If it's a recurrent product, which most, if clients stay with you, it's like apparently they like your product. And it's not just marketing, it's because they like it, they have used it, and they keep using it. So we covered the 4 stages of experiment, if I'm not wrong, yes. And let's see an example of this whole part of vision. And this is a very extreme example, but as you will see, a very successful example. So Facebook, in 2004 and 2005, they raised $13 million, and they didn't have a clear business model here. So how did this happen? So let's see the 2 hypotheses that they were testing and the experiments they did. They did an experiment, a product that, by the way, if you remember, I started on Facebook in 2007, and it was very different from today. And you see that value hypothesis, 50% of the users, by the way, actually it should say regardless of its active users, entered in Facebook.com daily. That's a lot of daily active users among your user base. So clearly, we are providing some value to the customer here. They like it. They find something they were looking for. And then it's a growth hypothesis. And in this one in Facebook is incredible. How do they reach this user base? They launched in Silicon Valley in February 2004. And by the end of that month, not year, it was used by 75% of the undergrads at Harvard with no investment on marketing. So apparently, clients, you are not only adding value to the ones that you find, but apparently you know how to find new users. 100%. It's pretty crazy, actually. It's very extreme. So even if they hadn't tested yet the business model, they were interacting with real users. It wasn't just like a test, or like they design everything, but they hadn't launched it or whatever. But they could prove that there's value and there's growth. And as we were saying before, the money will come afterwards if you are providing value and you can grow very fast. So, and by the way, yeah, with this again, without a clear business model. So then we get to the steering part, and this, by the way, needs to be something that needs to be like really intrinsic of the culture of the company, and that they keep repeating it over and over again, and you need to follow step by step all the time. Sounds boring, but this is the way to grow with this great process. So First of all, is that the concept, by the way, that I didn't say it is build, measure, learn. And once you have that, build, measure, learn. So again, scientific method, more or less applied to business. So you want to minimize that loop time. And this is when we get to the MVP. You cannot build like the Facebook of today, of almost 20 years after, to test whether there's a value hypothesis or a growth hypothesis. So you need to do very small tests, and one after the other. And in each of them, let's see like what is a minimum viable product that allows you to learn, that allows you to, you build as little as possible, you will be able to measure, and that allows you to learn. We saw that we didn't need to build today's Facebook to check that it adds value to the clients, but just like a crappy version in 2005. And then it's important to define the objectives as learning, as the learning milestones. And all of these times, by the way, every time that you go through this loop, you will see, you need to ask yourself the question, should we pivot? It wasn't there, let's try something else. Or persevere, or let's keep doing this. And it sounds an easy thing to decide, but it is not there. So, this, like the steer of leap, the step of leap. And this is very dangerous. You need to leap with some basis. The leaps of faith are literally the most dangerous elements of a startup. So many times entrepreneurs are like, I am sure that this will happen because of faith. There's no numbers behind it. There's no an experiment behind it. There's nothing like that. It's simply like a feeling. Again, it sounds very wrong, and it is, but it's very, very, very natural. And that if anyone could fall into that for ambition, for vision, for they want to speed up the process and what. So most entrepreneurs assume that the consumers are like them, and this is very, very common. And they will want their product, and that they will see the competitive advantages, but they are not them. They have other opportunities. The typical leap of faith, and this is why I said the Uber or freight transport is not something I like, is to say this technology X was used to attack the market Y because of the competitive advantage Z. So we have technology X2 that we will attack the market Y2 because we have the competitive advantage of Z2. So this is very dangerous. It's let's be the, I'll make it up. I heard once the Instagram for journalists. I was okay, but it's not Instagram work, but I'm not sure. It's in every market will behave the same way. So in general, that's a concept that of course may work sometimes, but beware of that, because we hear that sentence too often and it's usually not that successful. Also, that this we already talked about, the theater of success, that your growth comes from spending a lot of marketing or jumping on a trend blindly. Now you write AI after the name of any startup, and probably its valuation grows and that people will buy it and stuff like that. But many times it's not real value what there's behind. And again, and we saw this example in the cohorts webinar. I think it was the last one, the one on cohort analysis. I think it was very good. And that growth of active users doesn't necessarily mean that you are doing things right. You need to check the cohorts. So you may just be spending a lot of money on marketing, and that's it. And then there's this thing that I don't know how to pronounce, Genki Genbutsu or something like that, that it comes from Toyota. And this is a funny example. Actually, you can look it up online. If you write Toyota Sienna, I think only with that, probably you will find the story, or Toyota Sienna Lean or stuff like that. You can't really understand a business problem if you don't go and see it for yourself. The guy that needed to design the Toyota Sienna drove I don't know how much it was, 20,000 kilometers within the United States or even more, because he wanted to test in many different scenarios. Okay, this car is going to be for a family with kids. Where would they go? What obstacles would they find, and stuff like that. It's a pretty funny story. So less leaps of faith, and then try for yourself if it's a problem. And then one of the most important, the concept of testing. And here we go back to the concept of the MVP. And this, it doesn't necessarily need to be already like with the technology you want to apply. That we were saying before that many times the technology is the enabler of the new product or the new service. So you may not even need that. The more real, the better. But you don't even need to get that to test. For example, it could be like a video explaining the product, or someone that I love, which is the concierge minimum viable product. And this example, I loved it in the book, which is food on the table. Food on the table is a company that you tell them like the members of your family and what they like and what they don't like, and it will tell you like in the supermarkets next to you where you should buy what. I think it's pretty old already. And the funny thing is that for several years they didn't have any technology behind it. They had someone that would go to that area and like write down, look in the supermarkets and decide like what they should get. They did that for some years, and that's how they learned on how to do it. And then they build first of all, they tried that people would want that service, and second, that they how to solve it. And also in On Track, again, for example, there was like a routing algorithm to minimize the time that the trucks spent without any load. That is like a total waste. You're consuming resources, and that's value to no one. So for also like a couple of years, the algorithm was one guy that created the routes and everything and manually, and asked the drivers what they would like better, stuff like that. And then that's how they learned enough about the market to automate with actually pretty cool algorithms. But the hypothesis was to apply the technology, but it wasn't applied for like a couple of years, but then when you do it, it's obviously it's little by little. When you start doing it, then that is validated. You're not gonna find like so many surprises. I really like this type of examples, and it's like way more common that you would think. So also, obviously, the quality of an MVP needs to be enough, but not too good. So here's why we say quality is not the most important variable in designing an MVP, but rather the ability to learn. It can be crappy, but as long as you test it, and if in that market people don't like crappiness, but they just want like their final goal, it's all right. It's enough to learn. And during this phase, by the way, there is a great risk of abandoning the project. Why? Because half of the test, or probably maybe even more, will not, will fail. Essentially, you're testing something and it didn't work. So if the culture is not correct, probably people would keep like trying and testing, and then let's invest more in marketing because I think that's our problem, that we didn't reach enough people, or stuff like that. Or also, this happens many times to founders that are not full-time on their project. Many times they leave it because the first time that they find a test that fails, they are like, there's nothing here. And apparently it wasn't the right market. Apparently it wasn't the right thing. Maybe it was, but you just needed to tweak it a little bit. And then it's measure. As we were saying before, anything that we do needs to change a KPI in the company. And that means that we need to define the baseline of that KPI. Like before we applied this technology, we used to have usage in the platform of like 60%, for example. And then let's see what, this 60%, like what does it become after the experiment? Then tuning the engine. It's like, okay, we have a usage of 60 and we want to raise it to 80%. So let's try this. And then this is something, by the way, that many times, if you don't do it up front, if you don't do it before the experiment, you will see that after the experiment, it's like, we made this decision in terms of intuition. And then if you think about that, it doesn't change the product usage, but rather something else that we are not measuring, actually, or that we cannot measure. It's like, shit, you should have thought about that before. It's like, let's set the KPI, let's see what value it is, and let's confirm that the test that we are doing it will change this measurement, this KPI. And then let's make the decision. If the usage increased from 60 to 61%, it's not worth it. If it increased from 60 to 90%, it's worth it. Absolutely. Then also there's some danger here that you may be tempted of saying like, it worked, so let's consider that this will work now that we have 1,000 clients and when we have 1 billion clients. And that's absolutely possible. Because I'm sure you have seen this before, that at the beginning, a product will be bought by early adopters, then it's like the mass market, and then the laggers or something like that. I don't remember the specific wording. I remember early adopters. So it is easy to get the lower, how do you say in English? The lowest hanging fruit. So there's a small market that is like really looking forward to have your product. That for almost any product. But then let's see about the big market behind. So the mass market. So every time that you grow, you need to realize that you're changing the type of clients that you are attacking. For me, it was very easy at the beginning to get clients that wanted a CFO and were looking for it, but like to try to find it in a scalable manner and for a team of 25 people, then I need to do things that are differently than I did before. And I needed to adapt my service for a bigger market. So this, and I think indirectly we have talked about this a lot, is let's focus on actionable metrics instead of vanity metrics. So actionable metrics, the ones that you see a cause effect. Vanity metrics, the ones that are affected by something else but sound cool, and it's very cool. Like a couple of these is new users, active users without taking into account cohorts, or one of the biggest examples is the headcount of the own company. Actually, I think we all fail in this, and if you realize, I told you at the beginning, we're a team of over 25 people. But many startups or many people like just want to see their team grow, and you realize that they are not learning and they are not doing things, and that's not the most important KPI. What is one of the most important KPIs, for example? Retention. And to check that, better use cohorts, as we saw in the last webinar. Then, once that we're here, pivot or persevere. And we have 6 minutes left. I always have the same, but let's try to go pretty fast. So, many times a startup has been successful until, like relatively successful, but that doesn't meet the expectations for new investment. So, many times we need to persevere, but we don't have money. So many times that forces us to pivot. Then the runway, and I think we covered this in previous webinars, is the cash we have divided by how much cash we burn per month. So like we have 1 million, we're burning 100,000, we have 10 months left. In lean startup, it's better to think the number of opportunities that remain to be able to pivot, especially in the seed stage. We have enough money to try this, then if it doesn't work, we will try something else, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. But maybe you have 3 opportunities. In general, like something that delays the pivot is vanity metrics. It's also vanity itself, which is the third one, or fear, or the concept of sunk cost. We invested so much to get here that now we are not going to throw that away and start something else. So you keep persevering in something that is going wrong. The concept of sunk cost is one of the most important in life, I think. Or that they had unclear hypotheses. They didn't define what are we testing and how are we going to test. So reasons to pivot, that your experiments show that you need to learn something about your customers and start behaving differently. And from early adopters to mainstream, people don't behave the same. There's some types of pivoting, but I think I won't go in detail in this. What's a good example? Aardvark. Aardvark tried, like the initial idea, blurry in my opinion, personal assistant that helps you solve any problem in San Francisco. To solve any problem in general. Finding a restaurant, register a web page, whatever. They did some tests, actually with different brandings, that were like 2 to 4 weeks of a job. Let's see something that sorts ratings. Let's see something that helps you register on a website. Let's see a personal assistant that you can call. Let's see a web macro. So in the end, what happened? None of them. They did something that was more social, to interact with friends, to answer questions, similar to Quora. And at some point, it was acquired by Google by 50 million. But all this, there was between 8 and 16 weeks to try 4 things, which is amazing. So they did like very fast the loop of build, measure, learn. And then if we got here, and if we learned, and we're doing it right, we are like facing Series B, then let's accelerate. This is an example that I really like in the book, which is about, imagine you need to send 100 letters. You can prepare like the 100 texts, then to fold the 100 sheets of paper, then to put the 100 of them in their envelopes and the 100 stamps, and at the very end you realize that there's now a mailbox next to you, so you cannot send them. So what's better? To like the first letter, you do it completely, you see that everything worked, and then you decide to do the other 100 letters. I know this sounds obvious, but we keep doing the opposite many times. You prepare all the slides with one format, imagine, and then you start like writing the text, and at some point you realize that you need a different format. So you need to throw away 20 slides, stuff like that. So even if it's counterintuitive and it goes against scaling in theory, it's better to work in small batches at the beginning, complete the whole process, and then let's start with new. It speeds up a lot the build, measure, learn loop and reduces waste. Absolutely. Then, obviously, the growth engine. You need to have a sustainable growth engine. And that may come through different ways. It may word of mouth, depending on the product, like Facebook to me when I was 18. As an effect of product use, you need other people that will interact and say, hey, what are you using? Like, like typical thing of send from iPhone. People could ask, I mean, obviously this is too obvious, but people could ask, where did you send it from? Marketing financed by income from past, by revenue from past consumers. This is like scalable. Obviously, you are reinvesting the profits. And repeat purchases, which is subscriptions. All these are models of sustainable growth. There are 3 engines. A product can be sticky, and that is that there's retention because the switching costs are high. And in that, you want to have more new consumers than churn. Relatively easy, like I stay here, like Netflix already knows me and knows what I like, so I don't want to switch. The viral one, and this is fast, this is crazy, but this is also, it may be dangerous at some point. That growth is based on the transmission between users. Every user that you get will bring you N users, and you want N to be above 1, because then it will just grow by itself without any investment in marketing. Usually the LTV is very low. And now here, the paid one. Either paying salesmen or marketing or whatever, you're paying to acquire consumers or users that will stay with you for a long time, such that the margin that they bring you is higher than their acquisition cost. And they also need to cover, obviously, other costs of the company and stuff. And we talked about that in previous one. So also for this kind of growth engines, not only for value hypothesis, but also for growth hypothesis, you need to build, measure, and learn loop as fast as possible to try different ones. Then adapt. And this again is similar to what we were saying before, the early adopters and the mainstream consumers and stuff. Things are not going to be the same as you scale. You open a new market and you realize that new market, it's not the same than the first one. So it's going to create many different challenges that you weren't expecting. So you need to create a culture and you need to have an organization that adapts to that. So balance automatization and standardization, such that you can personalize for like new markets, for example, while keeping a process that it's scalable. This, I don't have time to explain the 5 whys, but it's something very important and an assumption that is very dangerous. Then the concept of innovate. Then it is very common, and I think it's the last one, right? Yeah, and then we have an example. It is very common to build a product and at some point decide that it ended. No, you need to have a flexible culture such that you always need to keep learning. This actually brings me to a beautiful role that, in my opinion, startups play in the world. So many times a big company has an R&D department. They understand that it's a cost and they will lose money in the R&D department, but they are building innovation there that may bring good stuff for the future. So many times these big corporations, these innovation departments don't work because they are contagiated by the rest of the culture of the company and the inertia of the rest of the company. So that's why a startup, if done right, they have no legacy costs that affect them. So they are more functional and they are more able to create a new product. And in fact, that's why big corporates many times buy startups, even if they are not profitable, because they substitute this like R&D department. In my opinion, the startups are kind of like the R&D department of the rest of the world, to put it that way. And they need to preserve that culture. A pretty good example of a very successful company is Intuit, and in particular, QuickBooks, the product. At the beginning, they built a new system for online banking. Classic, customers wanted to use the old system. They designed a new organization with small functional teams, reduce work, accelerating feedback processing, empower teams to make decisions. Things didn't work because teams tended to work by the old method. Again, even if it's a startup, they were already behaving like a corporate and we always did things this way. And then at some point, the teams were also in charge of the design process. The teams formed around powerful ideas and the client was involved in the initial idea. And then immediately they got it right in year 3. Well, not immediately, year 3, by the way. And the sales and the MPAs increased better than with the old system. But they pivoted, they persevered, they kept innovating despite being already a huge company that they were. Anyway, we're a little fast in these last minutes because we're already 4:03 here. But if there's any question or whatever, feel free to ask now, either in the chat or unmuting or raising hand or whatever you want. And if not, let's move on. So thank you very much for connecting. The next Thursday, we are going to have our last webinar from this series. Again, everything will stay in YouTube. So you can check it later or like for future audiences. The next one is going to be about revenue-based financing. These were CAPTCHAs, for example, is a good example. So revenue-based funding is a very new source of funding, very convenient for many startups. Again, one of these examples, the technology allowed them, and not everything is like financing rounds, and revenue-based funding is a super good opportunity. So looking forward to see you there, and I'll be giving it from Berlin. And if anyone wants to meet in Berlin next week, more than happy to meet. So thank you very much, and hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.